Welcome back to Linas Romantasy collection, where the alphas are dominant, the heroines are sassy, and the pets always have an attitude. Quick question for the pack before we dive into today's chaos. Where in the world are you listening from right now? Let me know in the comments, and drop a emoji if your furry sidekick is currently judging your audiobook choices. Today, we have a gritty, high-stakes ride. It's tense, it's funny, and it involves a very sassy wasteland scavenger, a dangerously protective mutant Lycan, and a tiny Chihuahua who thinks he's a dragon. But before we start, if you want to support the channel and get early access to stories like this, hit that join button down below. It helps us keep the engine running and the audiobooks coming. Now buckle up and grab your wrench. The bunker is breached, and the beast is waiting. Let's read. Chapter 1. The steel bunker felt like a coffin, and the air was getting thin. Cassie Miller sat on the cold floor, her back pressed against a rusty crate. Her hands shook, so she gripped the handle of Old Reliable. The heavy wrench felt solid and real. It was the only thing she could trust, besides the tiny, trembling ball of fur tucked into her flight suit. Killer, her tan Chihuahua, poked his head out of the zipper. His bug eyes scanned the dark room. He let out a low, vibrating growl that made his spiked collar clink. "Shh," Cassie whispered. She reached into her satchel and felt the dry leather of her beef jerky. She didn't need it. She needed to stay sharp. "We're okay. The door is steel. The walls are thick." Then came the first hit. Boom! The entire bunker shuddered. Dust rained down from the ceiling like gray snow. It coated her blue flight suit and made her cough. She pulled her brass compass from her pocket and watched the needle spin in circles. The vibration was messing with the magnets. Boom! The sound was like a punch to the stomach. It wasn't a bomb or a machine. It was a fist. A very large, very angry fist. Cassie looked at the blast wall. It was reinforced concrete, 3 feet thick. It should have been safe. I really picked a bad night to go house hunting. Outside, a voice scraped against the metal door. It sounded like rocks grinding together. It was deep and gravelly, carrying a weight that made the hair on her arms stand up. "Safety is an illusion, little scavenger," the voice rumbled. Cassie's heart hammered against her ribs. She began to count her bullets. She had 6 in her belt and 1 in the chamber of her small pistol. 7 shots. Against a mutant Lycan, 7 shots were like throwing pebbles at a tank. "Go away!" she yelled. Her voice cracked, which she hated. "There's nothing here but dust and a very mean dog." Killer took that as his cue. He jumped out of her suit and ran toward the blast wall. He barked so hard his back legs left the floor. He looked like a toy, but he sounded like he thought he was a dragon. Boom! A crack appeared in the concrete. A long, jagged line snaked from the ceiling to the floor. Cassie scrambled back, her boots skidding on the grit. She gripped her wrench until her knuckles turned white. "I'm not coming out!" she screamed. "I know," the voice replied. The next hit didn't just shake the room, it broke it. A huge chunk of the blast wall flew inward in the dark. The beast was tearing through the hole. She saw a flash of silver-gray fur and amber eyes that glowed in the dark. The beast was tearing through the structure with his bare claws. The steel door was fine, but the wall around it was turning to rubble. Cassie realized then that the bunker wasn't a cage to keep him out. It was a bowl, and she was the snack inside. The mutant reached through the gap, his giant claws hooking into the rebar. He pulled, and the concrete screamed as it gave way. Chapter 2. The wall didn't just break. It vanished. With one final violent tug, the mutant Lycan ripped a hole wide enough for a truck. Dust filled the air, thick and tasting of old lime. Cassie squinted through the haze. A giant stepped into the bunker. He was 7 feet tall, his head nearly brushing the ceiling. He wasn't just a wolf, and he wasn't just a man. He was a silver-gray nightmare, covered in jagged scars. A broken iron collar hung around his thick neck. His amber eyes locked onto Cassie, pinning her to the spot. Killer didn't care about the size difference. The Chihuahua charged, snapping his tiny jaws at the giant's toes. "Killer, no!" Cassie yapped. The giant tilted his head. He looked down at the tiny dog with a look of pure confusion. He didn't stomp on him. He just watched the little creature yell at his feet. Then, his gaze shifted back to Cassie. "You smell like fear," he said. His voice was a rough growl, but the words were clear. "And old grease." "It's called hard work," Cassie snapped. She backed into the corner, her boots hitting a pile of scrap metal. She raised Old Reliable high. "Stay back. I've cracked skulls with this wrench, and I'll crack yours too." "I am definitely going to need a bigger wrench." The Lycan took a step forward. He moved with a strange grace, like a shadow sliding across a wall. He didn't look like he was hunting. He looked like he was exploring his own house. He stopped just inches from the end of her wrench. "That tool is for fixing pipes," he said, "not for killing things like me." "Let's find out," Cassie said. She swung. She put every bit of her weight into the strike. She aimed for his temple, but the Lycan was fast. He didn't even flinch. His hand shot out, a huge, clawed hand that made hers look like a child's. He caught the steel head of the wrench in midair, a second before she slammed back down. "Mine," he rumbled. "Let go, you overgrown rug!" she shouted. He didn't let go. Instead, he twisted the wrench slightly, forcing her to drop it or break her wrist. She let go. Old Reliable clattered to the floor. The Lycan didn't pick it up. He just looked at her, his amber eyes burning with a strange light. "You're small," he said, "but you have teeth." "I have a gun, too," she said, reaching for her belt. In a blur of motion, he slammed his hand against the wall right next to her head. The concrete cracked under his palm. He was so close, she could smell the scent of pine and rain on his fur. It was a fresh smell, not the rot she expected. "The gun will not save you, scavenger," he whispered. "Nothing this hole will." Chapter 3. Cassie stared up at the wall of fur and muscle. Her breath came in short, jagged gasps. She could see the jagged scars on his chest, white lines against the silver-gray coat. He stayed there, his hand pinning her into the corner without even touching her. Killer was still barking, circling the Lycan's heels like a furry top. The giant ignored him. "What do you want?" Cassie asked. She tried to make her voice sound hard, but it wobbled. "If you're going to eat me, just get it over with. I'm mostly skin and bone. I'll probably give you a stomachache." The Lycan pulled his hand back from the wall. He stood up straight, his head tilted again. He seemed to be studying her flight suit, his eyes lingering on the faded navy fabric. "I do not eat scavengers," he said. "They taste of oil and bad luck." "Well, that's a relief," Cassie muttered. She reached down and scooped up Killer before he could actually land a bite. The dog wiggled in her arms, still trying to get at the beast. "So, if I'm not lunch, what am I?" The Lycan stepped back, giving her a bit of space. He looked around the ruined bunker. The blast wall was a wreck. The steel door was still locked tight, But it didn't matter now that the wall beside it was gone. "This is my territory," he said. "Everything in this valley belongs to Jax." "Jax?" Cassie asked. "That's your name?" "It is the name the men in white coats gave me," he said. His voice went cold, like a winter wind. "And since you are in my territory, you belong to me as well. You are my property." "Property? I'm not even a decent pair of boots in this guy's eyes." "I don't belong to anyone," Cassie said, her temper flaring up. "I'm a free agent. I have a truck, I have a dog, and I have a wrench. Well, I had a wrench until you tried to eat it." Jax looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You have a vehicle?" "A deep blue pickup," she said, lifting her chin. "She's a beauty. Fast, tough, and she doesn't talk back." Jax leaned in, his amber eyes narrowing. "A vehicle that moves is worth more than 100 bunkers. You will take me to it. Now." "And if I don't?" Jax didn't growl. He didn't threaten her. He just looked at the hole in the wall he had made with his bare hands. The message was clear. He could break her just as easily as the concrete. "I need to get to the north," Jax said. "The truck will take us." "Us?" Cassie scoffed. "There is no us. There is me, the dog, and the monster who broke my wall." "Take me to the truck," he repeated. It wasn't a request. Cassie looked at Old Reliable on the floor. She looked at the hole in the wall. She didn't have a choice. "Fine, but if you shed on the seats, you're walking." Chapter 4. The walk to the truck was tense. Jax walked behind her, his footsteps silent despite his size. Cassie kept her hand on the brass compass in her pocket, using it as a fidget toy to calm her nerves. Killer sat in the crook of her arm, watching Jax like a tiny hawk. They scrambled over the ruins of the old world. Everything was gray and broken, but the sun was starting to peek over the horizon. It turned the sky a bruised purple. "There she is," Cassie said, pointing toward a clump of dead trees. The deep blue 1995 pickup sat there, looking like a tank in a dress. The roll cage was welded tight, and the tires were thick with mud. It was the only bit of color in the wasteland. "It is blue," Jax noted. "I call her Big Blue," Cassie said. She walked up to the driver's side and patted the door. "She's got a V8 engine and enough heart to cross a desert." Jax walked around the truck. He touched the metal with his claws, leaving faint scratches in the paint. He looked at the bed of the truck, then back at Cassie. He seemed impressed, though he didn't say it. Killer decided he had enough of being ignored. As Jax passed the rear tire, the Chihuahua lunged out of Cassie's arms. He landed on the ground and sprinted for Jax's ankle. Snap! The tiny dog's teeth sank into the Lycan's fur. Jax stopped. He lifted his leg, and Killer came with it, dangling from his ankle like a fuzzy ornament. Jax looked down at the dog. He didn't look angry. He looked baffled. He shook his leg gently, and Killer flew off, landing in a patch of soft weeds. "Your beast is very brave," Jax said. "Or very stupid." "He's a bit of both," Cassie said. She scooped the dog off the weeds and hopped into the driver's seat, tossing Killer onto the passenger side. "Get in the back. You are too big for the cab." Jax didn't argue. He leaped into the bed of the truck, the suspension groaning under his weight. Cassie shoved her key into the ignition. "All right, Blue, don't let me down," she whispered. She turned the key. Chug, chug, clack. Nothing. "Start, you blue piece of junk, or we're both dog food." She tried again. The engine tried to turn over, but it just wouldn't catch. A familiar sinking feeling hit her. She knew that sound. It wasn't a dead battery or a lack of fuel. "What is wrong?" Jax's head appeared at the back window, his huge face filling the glass. "It's a loose wire," Cassie groaned. She slumped against the steering wheel. "I told myself to fix that connection yesterday. Now she won't start." "Fix it," Jax commanded. "I need leverage," she snapped. She reached for her belt out of habit, her hand finding nothing but air. She glared back toward the bunker. Old Reliable was gone, left in the dust of her ruined home. She looked at Jax, then at the empty road. They were sitting targets in a dead machine. The sun crested the horizon, bringing out the monsters that hunted in the light. Chapter 5. Cassie stared at the dashboard. The silence in the truck cab felt thick. She turned the key again. Chug, chug, clack. Dead. She smacked the steering wheel with the heel of her hand. Her knuckles burned. Outside the glass, Jax leaned against the truck bed. His claws tapped a slow rhythm against the deep blue metal. The sound grated on her nerves like sandpaper. "The machine is broken," Jax stated. His rough voice cut through the quiet. "It's a loose wire," Cassie shot back through the open window. "A 5-second fix." "Then fix it." "I don't have my tools," she said, her voice rising. "I left my wrench in the bunker when you decided to play Godzilla with my living room." Jax moved to the front of the truck. He stared down at the hood. "Show me the wire." Cassie hesitated. She didn't want him near the engine. She popped the hood release and climbed out. Killer whined from the passenger seat but stayed put. Cassie hauled the heavy metal hood up. She pointed to a frayed red cable dangling near the battery block. "That needs to connect to that terminal," she said, pointing to a brass nub. "But the bracket is bent. I need leverage to pry it back. If I touch the positive terminal with bare hands while he's standing there, I'll fry myself and he gets a cooked meal." Jax leaned over the engine block. He smelled of pine needles and cold dirt. He didn't ask questions. He reached his giant, clawed hand into the engine bay. His thick fingers pinched the bent metal bracket. Metal shrieked. He forced the steel back into shape using brute strength. Then he grabbed the frayed wire and shoved it onto the terminal. Sparks spit into the air. Jax didn't flinch. "Try the key," he ordered. Cassie scrambled back into the cab. She twisted the ignition. The V8 engine roared to life, shaking the frame. Relief washed over her like cold water. She leaned her head out the window. "You fixed it," she said. Jax slammed the hood down. The impact rocked the truck. He looked past her into the tree line. His amber eyes narrowed. His ears flicked flat against his skull. The fur on his broad shoulders bristled, standing straight up. Cassie followed his gaze. Shadowy shapes slinked between the dead trees. Low growls echoed in the dawn light. Yellow eyes blinked in the brush. It was a pack of wild wolves. They were starved, mangy, and focused entirely on the truck. They smelled the jerky in Cassie's bag. "Start driving," Jax rumbled. He didn't look back at her. He faced the tree line, his claws extending. Chapter 6. Cassie slammed the gear shift into drive. Big Blue lurched forward. The tires spun in the mud before finding grip. The truck rocketed down the dirt path. In the rearview mirror, Cassie saw the pack break from the trees. There were at least a dozen of them. They were scrawny, but fast, their paws tearing up the dirt as they chased the truck. They weren't mutants. They were just desperate animals. "They're gaining!" Cassie yelled over the roar of the engine. Jax stood in the bed of the truck. The wind whipped his silver-gray fur. He didn't crouch or hold on. He stood like a statue bolted to the metal. The leading wolf leaped, snapping its jaws at the tailgate. Jax didn't use a weapon. He didn't even shift into a full beast. He just reached down and grabbed the wolf by the scruff of its neck in midair. He hoisted the thrashing animal up. The wolf yelped, suddenly realizing it had picked a fight with a predator twice its size. Jax tossed the animal into the ditch beside the road. The rest of the pack hesitated. They saw the giant in the truck bed. They smelled the mutant scent rolling off him. The largest wolf, the alpha, let out a sharp bark and skidded to a halt. The pack scattered back into the woods. He didn't kill it. He just threw it. He's a monster, but he's not a butcher. Cassie kept her foot heavy on the gas pedal. The truck bounced over ruts and rocks, putting miles between them and the woods. She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Killer stood on the console, his front paws on the dashboard, barking out the windshield like he had scared the wolves away himself. "Good job, buddy," Cassie muttered, scratching behind the dog's ears. She glanced in the mirror again. Jax sat down in the truck bed, his back resting against the cab. He looked exhausted. The tension in his massive frame was gone. He looked less like a nightmare and more like a stray dog looking for a warm spot. She checked the fuel gauge. The needle hovered near the red E. "We need gas!" she called back through the sliding rear window. Jax didn't look back. "Find some. The road heads north. The laboratories are north." Cassie gripped the steering wheel tight. She didn't want to go to the mutant labs. She wanted to find the safe zone. She wanted to find her brother. But she had a mutant in the back of her truck, and she had an empty gas tank. "There's an old station a few miles up," she said. "We stop there. But you stay in the back. I do the scavenging." Jax grunted. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. Chapter 7. The gas station looked like a rusted skeleton. The roof over the pumps had collapsed years ago. The convenience store windows were smashed, the glass glittering on the cracked asphalt like ice. Cassie parked Big Blue near the rusted pumps. She cut the engine. The silence rushed back in, broken only by the tick of the cooling engine. She unbuckled her belt. "Stay," she told Killer. The Chihuahua huffed but curled into a ball on the seat. Cassie grabbed her empty plastic gas can from the floorboards. She stepped out of the truck. Jax remained in the truck bed. He watched her every move with those bright amber eyes. "I am checking the underground tanks," Cassie said, holding up the red plastic can. "If there's anything left, I have to pump it by hand." "It takes time." Jax nodded once. "Do not run." Cassie snorted. "Run where? You broke my house. I live in this truck now." She walked toward the manual pump station on the side of the building. She unscrewed the cap on the underground tank. Thick fumes drifted up. They were weak, but they were there. She hooked up her hand crank. She pumped the handle. Her arms ached with the effort. As the thick liquid slurped into the can, her mind raced. This is my chance. If I can get enough gas in the tank, I can jump in and floor it before he realizes what's happening. I just have to leave him here. She looked back at the truck. Jack sat very still. His head was tilted up, sniffing the air. He wasn't paying attention to her. He was focused on the ruined convenience store. Cassie kept pumping. The red can was half full. It was heavy. She dragged it over to the truck. Jax didn't turn around. She unscrewed the gas cap and started pouring the fuel in. She watched him the whole time. If she could just close the tailgate while he was distracted. "There is metal inside the building," Jax said suddenly. His voice made her jump. Fuel spilled on her boots. "It's a store," Cassie said, recovering quickly. There's metal everywhere, shelves, cans. No, Jack said. He stood up in the truck bed. There is a sharp tang in the air. Cold iron. Blood. Cassie stopped pouring. She capped the tank and dropped the plastic can. She drew her pistol. The heavy weight in her hand felt good. She clicked the safety off. "Stay here," she whispered. Jax didn't listen. He leaped over the side of the truck, landing without a sound. He walked past her, heading straight for the smashed glass doors of the store. Chapter 8. Jax stepped into the shadows of the store. Cassie followed close behind, her pistol raised. Dust hung thick in the air, catching in the beam of her flashlight. Rusted shelves formed a maze of junk. Killer barked from the truck, a sharp, frantic sound. Jax froze. His ears swiveled. Cassie heard it then. A low hum, a vibration in the floorboards. She looked down. A thin, almost invisible tripwire stretched across the aisle between the snack racks. Jax was mid-step, his giant boot hovering right over the wire. "Stop!" Cassie hissed. Jax didn't need the warning. He felt the tension in the air. He pulled his foot back. He looked down at the wire, tracing it with his eyes. It connected to the ceiling. Cassie followed the line. Bolted to the rafter above them was a heavy iron engine block, rigged to fall. If Jax had hit that wire, the block would have crushed him. "Scavenger trap," Cassie whispered. "Somebody set this recently." Jax looked at the heavy iron block hanging above them. He didn't look scared. He looked angry. A low growl started deep in his chest. He's too big for this space. If he freaks out, he's bringing the roof down on both of us. "Don't move," Cassie said. She reached into her flight suit and pulled out her jerky knife. It wasn't old reliable, but it was sharp. "I can cut the line near the anchor." She squeezed past him. The space was tight. She brushed against his silver fur. It felt coarse, like wire brush. He stood perfectly still, letting her work. She found the knot tying the tripwire to the shelf. She sawed through the tough cord. The tension snapped. Above them, the engine block shifted with a loud groan of metal. The rusted bolts holding it to the ceiling gave way. The heavy iron plummeted. Cassie couldn't move fast enough. The block was wider than the aisle. Jax moved. He didn't jump back. He lunged forward. He shoved Cassie hard. She hit the floor, sliding under a bottom shelf. Dust choked her. A sickening crunch echoed through the store. The floor shook. Cassie scrambled out from under the shelf. The engine block sat in the middle of the aisle, crushing the linoleum. Jax stood next to it. He was breathing hard. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice strained. Cassie shook her head, coughing dust. "No, you?" Jax looked down at his left arm. A jagged piece of the iron engine block had sliced deep into his bicep. Dark red blood soaked into his silver fur, dripping steadily onto the floor. He didn't flinch, but his amber eyes looked dull. "I will need," he started, then paused. He swayed slightly on his feet. "I will need the needle and thread." Chapter 9. The air in the gas station store felt like a tomb. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of light that broke through the cracked roof. Jack stood by the fallen engine block, his arm a mess of shredded silver fur and dark, wet red. The blood dripped onto the linoleum with a steady rhythm. Each drop sounded like a hammer strike in the quiet room. He looked at the wound with a strange detachment, though his chest rose and fell in short, sharp bursts. Giant who had just saved her from being a pancake. "You did not have to do that," she said. Her voice felt thin. Jax looked at her. His amber eyes seemed dimmer, the fire in them banked by the shock of the cold iron. The trap was for a beast. You are a scavenger. It would have ended you. Yeah, well, now it's trying to end your arm, Cassie snapped, her sass returning as a shield against the fear. Get back to the truck. I have a medical box under the seat. I cannot fix you in here where it smells like rat spit and old oil. Jax swayed. He did not argue. He turned and walked toward the exit, his gait hitched. Cassie stayed close to his side, her hand hovering near his waist but never touching. She did not want to find out if he would bite her in his pain. They reached the deep blue truck. Killer was still on the dashboard, his tiny paws scratching at the glass. He let out a sharp yip when he saw the blood. "Stay back, Killer!" Cassie warned as she yanked open the passenger door. She reached under the seat and pulled out a dented white metal box. It had a red cross painted on the top, though most of the paint had flaked off. Jax sat on the tailgate. The truck groaned under his bulk. He rested his injured arm on his knee. The gash was deep. The iron had carved a trench through the muscle. Cassie opened the box. She pulled out a bottle of clear antiseptic and a roll of clean gauze. She felt the weight of her choice. She had enough supplies for a few small cuts, but this was a major repair. This kit had cost her 50 silver coins at the last trade post, a price that had cleaned out her savings for a month. "This is going to sting," she said. "If you try to bite me, I will shoot you with the last 7 bullets I have." Jax bared his teeth in a grimace that might have been a smile. "Proceed, scavenger." Cassie poured the liquid over the wound. Jax let out a low, vibrating growl that shook the air in her lungs. He gripped the edge of the truck bed so hard the steel buckled under his claws. His muscles bunched and corded, looking like thick cables under his skin. Cassie worked with a steady hand. She did not use a needle. She did not have one strong enough for his hide. Instead, she used medical tape and tight wraps of gauze to bind the edges of the skin together. "If he turns on me now, I am nothing but a snack with a first aid kit." "Your skin is like leather," she muttered, trying to distract herself from the heat coming off his body. "I am lucky I do not need a hammer to get this tape to stick." Jax did not answer. He watched her hands. His breathing slowed as the antiseptic did its work. By the time she finished, the gauze was already starting to pink from the blood, but the flow had slowed. He looked at the white bandage against his silver fur. It looked out of place, a mark of weakness on a creature made for war. Chapter 10. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the wasteland in shades of rust and bone. Cassie sat on the ground near the rear tire of the truck. She had a small fire going in a hubcap she had found. She used dry sticks and scraps of paper from the store. There were no embers to stoke, just the flick of orange flames licking at the air. Killer was curled in a ball near the heat, his ears twitching at every crackle of the wood. Jax remained in the truck bed. He was hunched over, his back against the cab. He had been silent for an hour. "The men in white coats," Cassie said, breaking the quiet. "You mentioned them back in the bunker. You said they gave you your name." Jax shifted. The metal of the truck bed creaked. "They gave me many things. This fur, these claws, the pain that lives in my bones." "Why?" "They wanted a soldier that did not need a rifle," Jax said. His voice was a rasp, like stone on stone. "They took men from the fringe, men no one would miss. They put us in glass rooms. They fed us chemicals that tasted like copper and lightning. Most died. I changed." Cassie looked into the fire. She thought of her brother, Toby. He was 10 when the world broke. He had been small and fast, with a laugh that could brighten a dark room. If the labs were taking people from the fringe, Toby was the exact kind of person they would hunt. "Is that why you were going north?" she asked. "To kill them?" Jax looked down at his bandaged arm. "I do not seek their blood. I seek the end of the change. Every time the moon grows full, my mind burns. The beast wants the lead. The man wants to sleep. One day, the man will not wake up. There is a serum, a stabilizer. They kept it in the main lab." "The North Lab," Cassie whispered. "That is near the safe zone. People say there is a city behind walls up there. Electricity, clean water, a place where kids can grow up without worrying about being eaten." "Safe is a lie," Jack said. He looked at her, his amber eyes catching the firelight. "There is only the hunter and the prey. You are a hunter, Cassie Miller. You hunt for scraps. I hunt for peace. We are the same." "He thinks we are the same, but he has claws, and I have a broken heart and an empty gas tank." "I am not a hunter," she said. "I am a survivor. There is a difference." "Not in this world," Jax replied. Cassie leaned her head against the tire. She felt the cold of the evening air creeping into her flight suit. She could leave. Jax was hurt. He was slow. She could jump in the cab, kick the engine over, and be 10 miles away before he could climb out of the bed. But she looked at the bandage she had placed on his arm. She thought of the way he had pushed her out of the way of the falling iron. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a piece of jerky. She tore it in half. She tossed one piece up into the truck bed. It landed near Jax's hand. "Eat," she said. "You cannot heal on an empty stomach." Jax picked up the dried meat. He sniffed it once, then popped it into his mouth. He chewed slowly. "You stay?" "Only because I need a map," Cassie lied. "And you are the only one who knows the road." Chapter 11. The next morning brought a sky the color of a bruised plum. Cassie was behind the wheel of Big Blue, pushing the truck through a narrow canyon road. The walls of the canyon were steep, made of crumbling red rock that looked like it would slide if a bird landed on it. Killer sat on her lap, his head out the window. His nose worked overtime, catching the scents of the road. Suddenly, he let out a low, rumbling growl. It was a sound he saved for real trouble. "What is it, boy?" Cassie asked. She saw them a second later. 3 vehicles were parked across the road, blocking the path. They were scrap heaps on wheels, rust buckets, held together by weld lines and prayer. Men stood around them. They wore coats made of tire treads and carried lengths of pipe and crude crossbows. Cassie hit the brakes. The truck skidded to a stop, kicking up a cloud of red dust. "Scavengers," she hissed. Jax rose up in the back of the truck. He looked over the top of the cab. His presence was like a dark cloud over the vehicle. The men in the road saw him and stepped back, but they did not run. A man in a long, greasy trench coat stepped forward. He had a face like a dried apple and a smile that showed more gaps than teeth. He held a megaphone to his mouth. "Nice ride, girlie!" the man yelled. His voice was tinny and shrill through the speaker. "And that is a fine-looking rug you got in the back. We want the truck, and we want the girl. The beast can go if he can run fast enough." Cassie rolled down her window. She kept her pistol out of sight, but ready. "The truck is mine, the dog is mine, and the rug has a name. It's Jax, and he is having a very bad day. I suggest you move your junk before he decides to use your cars as chew toys." The man in the coat laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. We got needs, scavenger. We need parts. We need entertainment. You look like both. Jax leaned over the side of the truck bed. He let out a roar that echoed off the canyon walls like a thunderclap. The sound was a physical blow, making the men flinch. One of them dropped his crossbow. I will tear your throats out, Jax growled. His voice did not need a megaphone to fill the canyon. He wants to kill them, Cassie whispered to herself. She could feel the heat of his rage coming through the back window. If I let him loose, this road will turn into a butcher shop in 5 minutes. Wait, Cassie shouted. We can trade. I have silver. I have jerky. Just let us pass. Trade? The leader sneered. Why trade for a slice when we can take the whole cow? Kill the beast. Take the girl. The men raised their weapons. Cassie's thumb flicked the safety off her pistol. She had 7 shots. There were 10 men. The math was a punch to the gut. Jax, no! She yelled as the giant prepared to leap from the truck. Stay in the bed! Chapter 12. Jax did not stay in the bed. He ignored Cassie's shout and vaulted over the side. He landed on the dirt road with a thud that sent a shockwave through her boots. He did not look like a man anymore. His silver fur stood on end, and his amber eyes were wide, fixed on the leader in the trench coat. Kill it! The leader screamed. A bolt from a crossbow whizzed through the air. It struck Jax in the shoulder, sticking into the thick muscle. He did not even flinch. He kept walking, a slow, steady march of death. Another bolt hit his thigh. He ripped it out with one hand and tossed it aside like a toothpick. Jax, stop! Cassie climbed out of the truck, her pistol raised. She fired a shot into the air. The loud crack of the gun made the scavengers jump, but they were too focused on the monster coming for them. We can drive through! Get back in! They threatened the pack, Jax rumbled. His voice was deep, vibrating with a hunger for violence. He reached the first man. The scavenger swung a heavy iron pipe at Jax's head. Jax caught the pipe in midair. He twisted his wrist and the iron bent like a wet noodle. He grabbed the man by the front of his tire-tread coat and tossed him 20 feet into the canyon wall. The man hit the rock and crumpled. Nonviolence is for the weak, Jax growled, looking back at Cassie for a split second. The leader in the trench coat backed away toward one of the scrap vehicles. He wasn't reaching for a gun. He reached for a lever mounted on the back of a flatbed truck. Now! The leader yelled. 4 men on the canyon walls stood up from behind the rocks. They weren't holding crossbows. They were holding heavy, weighted nets. The mesh was a dull, flat gray, the color of silver-plated steel. Jax, look up! Cassie screamed. It was too late. The men threw the nets with practiced ease. The weighted edges whistled through the air. The silver-coated mesh expanded, falling over Jax like a heavy shroud. As soon as the metal touched his fur, Jax let out a scream that didn't sound human. It was a high-pitched wail of agony. Smoke curled from where the net hit his skin. The silver was like acid to his mutant biology. He collapsed to his knees, his muscles seizing. He clawed at the mesh, but the more he moved, the more the silver burned. No! Cassie ran forward, her boots pounding on the dirt. The scavengers cheered. They swarmed out from behind their cars, holding long poles to pin the net down. They didn't care about Cassie anymore. They had the prize. The beast is down, the leader cackled. Wrap him tight. We're going to have a show tonight. Cassie leveled her pistol at the leader's chest. Her hand shook. She had 6 bullets left. The scavengers were closing in on Jax, who was thrashing in the dirt, his silver-gray fur charring under the weight of the nets. I have to save him, or I am next. One of the men turned toward her, a jagged knife in his hand. He had a hungry look in his eyes that made Cassie's skin crawl. "Drop the toy, girlie," the man said, "or we net you too." Chapter 13. The dirt road was a chaos of dust and shouting. Cassie squeezed the trigger of her pistol. The sharp crack echoed off the rock walls. The man with the jagged knife flinched. He stumbled back a few steps. "Back off!" Cassie screamed. She swept the barrel of the gun toward the leader in the trench coat. The men holding the heavy silver net down on Jax hesitated. The metal burned his fur, leaving scorched marks in the shape of the mesh. Jax gasped for air. The silver sapped his strength. He stopped trying to rip the net with his hands. "You have 5 shots, girlie," the leader sneered. His confidence returned. "I have 10 men. You do the math." "I do not need math," Cassie said. Her voice stayed level. She ignored the frantic pounding in her chest. She swung the pistol away from the leader and aimed it at the closest man holding a corner of the net. "I just need to break the weak links." The man holding the net went pale. He stared at the gun, then looked at his boss. He made his choice. He dropped the thick rope and bolted for cover behind a rusted flatbed truck. The net went slack on one side. That was the opening Jax needed. He reached up with his uninjured right arm. He grabbed the heavy mesh. The silver seared his palm. The smell of burnt meat stung Cassie's nose. Jax ignored the pain. He pulled the net upward, tearing it from the hands of the other 3 men. He hurled the metal shroud into the dirt. "Kill him!" the leader shrieked. Jax lunged. He caught the leader by the collar of his coat and slammed him into the side of the deep blue truck. The impact left a dent in the metal panel. Jax bared his fangs. "Run," Jax rumbled. His voice shook with strain. The leader wiggled out of his coat and sprinted down the road. The rest of the scavengers scattered into the scrub brush. Cassie lowered her gun. She let out a breath of stale air. She looked at Jax. He leaned against the truck bed. Black burns crisscrossed his arms and back like lightning bolts. "Get in," Cassie said. Jax climbed over the tailgate. Cassie scrambled into the driver's seat. Killer sat up from under the brake pedal. Cassie shoved the truck into gear and slammed the gas pedal to the floor. They sped past the scrap vehicles and cleared the canyon. Cassie looked in the rearview mirror. Her stomach dropped. One of the scavengers had sliced the canvas bag strapped to the tailgate during the fight. They had lost all of their jerky. Chapter 14. Hunger hit Cassie like a kick in the teeth by late afternoon. The landscape shifted from red rocks to a sprawling dead forest. The trees stood like blackened skeletons. The sky turned a muddy gray. The fuel needle on the dashboard hovered near empty. Cassie parked the truck in a small dirt clearing off the main road. She cut the engine. The silence felt heavy. "We have a problem," Cassie said. She climbed out and walked to the back of the truck. Jack sat up against the cab window. He inspected the black burns on his arms. The silver marks looked raw, but they no longer smoked. He peered over the edge of the tailgate. "The meat is gone," he noted. "The scavengers cut the bag," Cassie said. She kicked the rear tire. "I have half a bottle of water, 0 food. My stomach thinks my throat is cut." "I will hunt," Jack said. He pushed himself to his feet. "You are burned," Cassie pointed out. "And you have a slice in your arm from an engine block. You cannot run." "I do not need to run to kill," he said. He jumped down from the truck. He swayed, but he kept his balance. "Stay here. If he passes out in the woods, I have no way to move him, and I am not dragging his heavy hide back to the truck." "Take this," she said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her jerky knife. She flipped it and offered him the handle. "It is sharp. Better than nothing." Jax took the knife. His giant fingers made the handle look like a toothpick. He walked into the dead woods. He made no sound on the dry leaves. Cassie gathered some rocks and a rusted hubcap. She piled dry sticks inside the metal circle. She used a spark tool from her pocket to start a small fire. There were no embers to stoke, just a small, sad flame. She sat by the fire with Killer. The tiny dog rested his chin on her boot. The shadows grew long. The air turned cold. Cassie watched the tree line. She hated waiting. She felt useless. A branch snapped in the dark. Cassie stood up and pulled her pistol. Jax stepped into the firelight. He held a large, dead rabbit by the ears. He tossed it onto the ground near the hubcap. He handed her the knife back. "Cook it," he rumbled. He sat down heavily on a fallen log. He looked exhausted. Cassie looked at the rabbit, then at her knife. She had never skinned an animal in her life. She ate jerky from a plastic bag, but she looked at the deep gash on Jax's arm. He needed the protein to heal. She needed the food to keep driving. "Fine," she muttered. She knelt down in the dirt. Chapter 15. The rabbit tasted like ash and stringy muscle. Cassie chewed the tough meat. It filled the hole in her stomach, but it did not taste good. She tossed a piece to Killer. The Chihuahua swallowed it whole. Jax ate his portion in silence. He chewed the cooked meat without complaint. "You did not have to drop the net," Jax said. He stared into the hubcap fire. Cassie swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" "You had the gun on the leader. You could have shot him. You could have driven away. You chose to aim at the net holder to free me." "I needed the navigator," she lied. She poked the fire with a stick. "You know the way north. I do not." "Lies," Jax said. The corner of his mouth twitched. "You protect your pack, even the broken members." Cassie felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I have to walk tomorrow to find gas. And I have to walk tomorrow to find gas. And I need to find a new wrench." Jax nodded. He stood up and climbed into the truck bed. Cassie got into the cab with Killer. She locked the doors. The truck felt like a freezer box. She curled up on the passenger seat. She pulled her arms into her flight suit for warmth. She woke up to a loud bang. Rain slammed against the glass like bullets. The temperature had plummeted. It was a flash storm. She looked in the rearview mirror. Jax sat huddled in the corner of the truck bed. The freezing rain soaked his fur. He shivered. The cold water washed over his open wounds. Cassie bit her lip. She unlocked the back window. She slid the glass open. The freezing wind whipped into the cab. "Get in!" she yelled over the storm. Jax looked at the small window. He looked at his broad shoulders. "I will not fit," he shouted back. "You will freeze to death out there," Cassie yelled. "Shift! Change your shape! Do something!" Jax closed his eyes. His body tensed. A sickening crunch of bone sounded over the rain. He shrank. The fur retreated. His muscles compressed. In a few seconds, he was no longer a 7-foot beast. He looked like a very large, very scarred human man. He still had pointed teeth, but he fit through the window. He slid into the back seat. He brought the chill of the storm and freezing rain with him. Chapter 16. The cab of Big Blue was cramped. Jax sat in the back, his knees pressed against the front seats. He did not have clothes. He crossed his arms over his chest to hide his scars. His teeth chattered. Cassie turned on the heater. The engine was off, so the air was weak and lukewarm. It was better than the storm outside. Killer jumped from the front seat. He landed in Jax's lap. The Chihuahua dug his nose into the man's side. He curled into a tight, warm ball. Jax looked down at the dog. He looked confused. "He likes heat," Cassie explained. She kept her eyes forward. She did not want to stare at him. "He uses you as a radiator." "He is a parasite," Jax muttered, but he did not push the dog away. He rested his large hand on Killer's back. The storm raged outside. Thunder shook the truck. The lightning flashed, lighting up the dead forest in jagged bursts of white. "The change," Cassie said. "It hurts." Jax leaned his head back against the glass. "Yes, the bones break. They reform. The man becomes the beast. The beast becomes the man. The pain is the price." "My brother Toby," Cassie started. She surprised herself. She never talked about Toby. "He had asthma. Before the world broke, he used an inhaler. He hated it. He said it made him feel broken. He wanted to be strong." Jax opened his eyes. He looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. "He is not broken," Jax said. "He survived you. That makes him strong." "I hope he survived." Cassie rubbed her eyes. The fatigue weighed on her like a pile of rocks. She reached into her pocket. She pulled out the brass compass. The needle spun wild in the magnetic storm. "The map," she said. "Where is the lab?" Jax pointed a thick finger at the windshield. "North, across the Black River. The bridge is a day away on foot." "We will not walk," Cassie said. "I will find fuel. I am not leaving Big Blue behind. This truck is my home." "Then we find fuel," Jax agreed. The tension in the cab faded. The sound of the rain turned into a dull roar. Cassie closed her eyes. She listened to the steady rhythm of Jax's breathing. It was deep and calm. For the first time since she left the bunker, she did not feel alone. Chapter 17. The storm screamed outside the truck. Rain hammered the roof of Big Blue like 1,000 tiny drumsticks. Each flash of lightning turned the cab into a room of white light and black ink. Inside, the air was cold enough to turn breath into ghosts. Cassie curled into a ball on the driver's seat. She pulled her knees to her chest. Her navy flight suit felt thin. The fabric did not keep out the damp chill that seeped through the door seals. In the back, Jax sat on the floor. He was no longer the silver beast. He was a man. His skin showed a map of white scars. The iron gash on his arm was a dark red line in the dark. He shook. It was a rhythmic tremor that made his teeth click. His ribs stood out with every breath. He looked small in the cramped space, even though his frame was broad. Killer did not care about the shift. The Chihuahua stayed on Jax's lap. The dog was a small, tan furnace. He pressed his ribs against the man's stomach. Jax did not push him away. His large hand rested on the dog's back. His fingers twitched. "You need a blanket," Cassie said. Her voice sounded loud in the small space. Jax did not look up. "I need the sun." Cassie reached into the footwell. She found a grease-stained tarp. It was stiff and smelled of old oil, but it was thick. She tossed it over the seat back. "Wrap yourself in that. It is better than nothing." Jax grabbed the plastic sheet. He pulled it around his shoulders. The crinkle of the tarp was sharp over the sound of the rain. He leaned his head against the seat. The lightning flashed again. In that second, Cassie saw his eyes. They were not amber anymore. They were a pale, tired brown. He looked like a man who had walked through a fire and forgot why he started. The tension in the cab changed. It was no longer the fear of a predator. It was the weight of two people stuck in a sinking ship. Cassie watched the way his chest moved. She thought about the bunker. She thought about the way he pushed her out of the way of the iron block. I should hate him for the bunker, but he looks like a man who just lost a fight with a lawnmower. My brother used to get cold like that, Cassie said. She kept her eyes on the dark windshield. After an asthma attack, his body would just give up for a while. I used to pile every coat we had on him. Jack shifted. The tarp rustled. He survived because of you. Maybe, she said. Or maybe I just got lucky. Killer let out a soft huff. He was fast asleep. The dog's trust was a strange thing. He knew Jax was dangerous, but right now, he only knew Jax was warm. Jax closed his eyes. The tremor in his limbs slowed. The heat from the tiny dog in the tarp began to work. Cassie leaned her head against the window. The cold glass chilled her temple. She watched the rain wash the dust of the road off the hood of the truck. The deep blue paint shone in the dark. Chapter 18. Morning came with a gray, flat light. The storm was gone. The forest was a graveyard of wet wood and black ash. Cassie woke up with a kink in her neck. She sat up and rubbed her eyes. Her stomach let out a loud groan. The rabbit from the night before was a distant memory. Jax was awake. He remained in his human form, his broad shoulders cramped against the door. He looked weak. The silver burns on his back were dull black marks, but his body had no fuel to heal the iron gash. He looked starved. "We move," Jax rumbled. Cassie nodded. She reached into the glove box. She moved a stack of old fuses and a handful of loose screws. Her fingers hit a piece of stiff paper. She pulled it out. It was a map. It was hand-drawn on the back of a grocery store flyer. "Where did you get that?" Jax asked. "Found it in a car wreck 3 months ago," Cassie said. She spread it out on the dash. "I forgot I had it. It shows the old trade routes. Look." She pointed to a circle near the top. It was marked Facility 4. "That is the lab," Jax said. His voice went low. "The place where they made the serum." Cassie looked at the map. Below the lab, there was a star. It was labeled Safe Zone, Gate 2. The two locations were only 10 miles apart. Her heart gave a hard thud. Toby needs me, but Jax needs this cure, or the beast eats him whole. "The lab is on the way to the safe zone," Cassie said. She tried to keep her voice flat. "But the truck has no gas. We are not going anywhere in Big Blue." Jax looked at the map. Then he looked at the forest. "There is a road a mile east. Old tankers used to park there. Maybe there is a drop of fuel left in a line." "A mile? We have to walk a mile and then come back?" Cassie looked at her boots. They were worn thin. "And we have to carry the fuel?" "I will carry it," Jax said. Cassie grabbed her pistol and checked the magazine. 5 bullets. She shoved the brass compass into her pocket. The needle was still. The storm's mess was over. She looked at the truck. She hated leaving it. It was her only home. "Fine," she said. "But if we find a scavenger, you stay back. I do the talking." They stepped out into the mud. The air was crisp. Jax moved through the trees like a ghost. He was silent. Cassie tripped over a root and cursed. Killer stayed in her flight suit, his head poking out of the zipper. They found the tankers an hour later. They were rusted hulls, half buried in the dirt. Cassie climbed onto the back of the largest one. She found a valve. She turned it. A thick brown liquid trickled out. "It is gas," she whispered. "Dirty, but it will burn." She found an old plastic jug in the weeds. She filled it. It was heavy. Jax took it from her with one hand. He did not even look at the weight. They headed back to Big Blue. Chapter 19. The truck roared to life. The dirty fuel made the engine sputter, but it held. Cassie drove north. The road was a mess of cracks and potholes. She steered Big Blue with care. She did not want to pop a tire. They reached the Black River by noon. The bridge was a nightmare of twisted steel. The center span had dropped into the water. The river was a churning mess of dark foam and debris. It looked like a throat ready to swallow anything that fell in. "It is out," Cassie said. She stopped the truck at the edge of the gap. Jax climbed out of the bed. He walked to the edge. He looked at the water. "The river is too deep to wade. The current is a trap." Cassie got out and stood next to him. The gap was 20 feet wide. On the other side, the road continued toward the mountains. The lab was up there. The safe zone was up there. "We can't jump it," she said. "Not in a truck this heavy." "The side rails are steel," Jax noted. He pointed to the thick beams that ran along the edge of the bridge. "They are still bolted to the concrete." Cassie looked at the beams. They were long. If they could rip them up and lay them across the gap, they might have a track for the tires. But they were bolted down with heavy nuts. "I need my wrench," she hissed. "I could unbolt those in an hour." "No time," Jax said. He walked to the first beam. He gripped the edge of the steel. He braced his feet. His muscles surged. The silver fur on his arms stretched tight. With a sound like a gunshot, the first bolt snapped. Then the second. He ripped the steel beam from the bridge like he was pulling a weed from a garden. He tossed it across the gap. It landed with a loud clang on the other side. "One more," Cassie said. Her breath was short. Jax moved to the second beam. His human muscles stretched tight, tearing the unhealed skin. He let out a ragged growl, his bones protesting the impossible strain. Red spots bloomed on the white cloth. He did not stop. He wrenched the second beam free. He laid it parallel to the first one. "The water looks like a throat ready to swallow us." "It is a narrow path," Jax said. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. Cassie looked at the two thin strips of steel. They were just wide enough for the truck tires. One slip, and they would be in the river. "I have to drive it," she said. "I will push from the back," Jax said, "to keep the weight even." "If you fall, I can't catch you," Cassie warned. "Drive," Jax said. Chapter 20. Cassie sat in the driver's seat. Her palms were wet. She wiped them on her pants. She gripped the steering wheel. She put the truck in low gear. "Ready?" she called out. "Move," Jax replied. He stood behind the tailgate, his hands flat against the metal. Cassie let off the brake. The truck rolled forward. The front tires hit the steel beams. The metal groaned. The beams flexed under the weight of the V8 engine. Cassie kept her eyes on the end of the beams. She did not look down at the black water below. The truck moved inch by inch. The beams creaked. The sound was like a scream. "Steady," she whispered. She felt Jax pushing. His strength kept the truck from sliding to the left. The back tires hit the steel. Now the entire weight of Big Blue was over the river. The beams dipped. The truck tilted. "Cassie!" Jax yelled. A bolt on the far side of the bridge snapped. The left beam shifted. The front left tire slipped off the steel. The truck lurched. The frame hit the beam with a bone-jarring thud. Cassie slammed on the brakes. The truck hung over the edge. The front left tire spun in the air. Below it, the river roared. One wrong move and the river gets the truck and my soul. "Do not move!" Jax shouted. He moved to the side of the truck. He grabbed the front bumper. He was standing on the narrow beam, his heels hanging over the water. The truck groaned again. The metal of the beam was bending. "The steel is giving way!" Cassie yelled. She gripped the wheel so hard her fingers went numb. "Jax, get back!" "Stay in the seat!" Jax roared. He dug his claws into the chrome of the bumper. He pulled. He was trying to lift the front of the truck back onto the beam. His face turned dark red. The scars on his ribs stood out like white fire. The truck shifted. The tire caught the edge of the steel. The beam let out a final, dying shriek. It twisted. The truck began to slide. Not just the tire, but the whole frame. The tail of the truck swung toward the river. "Cassie!" The world tilted. Cassie saw the sky, then the dark water. The truck was falling. Chapter 21. The front left tire of Big Blue spun in empty space. Below it, the black river roared, a churning throat of dark water and jagged debris. Cassie gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned the color of bone. The truck tilted at a sickening angle. Every time she shifted her weight, the frame let out a metallic shriek against the narrow steel beam. The metal was bending. She could feel the vibration of the river through the floorboards. It felt like a heartbeat, steady and cold, waiting for her to fail. "Do not move!" Jax roared from the front. He stood on the twisting beam, his heels hanging over the edge of the drop. His silver fur was matted with river mist and fresh blood. The gash on his bicep had torn wide open during his effort to lay the tracks. Dark red soaked the gauze, dripping onto the rusted steel. He looked exhausted. His amber eyes clouded with pain, but he did not let go of the bumper. His claws dug into the chrome, leaving jagged grooves in the metal. Cassie looked at the dashboard. The fuel gauge was a dead needle. The engine sputtered, struggling to idle on the dirty gas they had scavenged. "If I fall, Toby will never know I came for him. He will think I just stopped looking." The thought was a punch to the gut. She forced her breathing to slow. She looked at the rearview mirror. Killer was curled under the passenger seat, his tail tucked between his legs. The dog knew they were on the edge. "Jax, the beam is failing!" she yelled. "The bolts are pulling out of the concrete!" "I have it," Jax grunted. His muscles bunched and corded. The scars on his ribs stood out like white fire. He let out a low, guttural sound and pulled. He wasn't just holding the truck. He was trying to lift 3 tons of steel back onto the path. The truck lurched. The front left tire caught the edge of the beam. It bit into the metal with a scream of rubber. Cassie slammed her foot on the gas. The engine coughed, a cloud of black smoke erupting from the tailpipe. But the rear tires found grip. The truck surged forward, dragging itself off the failing beam and onto the solid concrete of the far side. Cassie did not stop until she was 20 feet past the gap. She slammed the gear shift into park and killed the engine. Her hands shook so hard she could not unbuckle her seatbelt. She slumped against the headrest, listening to the silence of the mountains. Jax collapsed onto the pavement behind the truck. He stayed there, his chest heaving. The silence was broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine and the distant rush of the river they had just cheated. Cassie finally found the latch and stumbled out of the cab. She knelt in the dirt next to Jax. He looked smaller now. His broad frame slumped in defeat. The blood from his arm was a steady stream. "We made it," she whispered. Jax did not look up. He just closed his eyes. The truck lives. The scavenger lives. Now we walk. Chapter 22. The road toward the lab was a steep climb through a forest of pine trees that had survived the fires. They were gnarled and gray, their needles brittle underfoot. Cassie led the way, her hand resting on the handle of her jerky knife. She kept the pistol in her belt, the 6 bullets a heavy weight against her hip. Big Blue sat behind them at the bridge, a dented monument to their luck. They had to leave it. The road ahead was blocked by a giant rock slide that a goat or a mutant might navigate. Jax followed 10 paces behind. He remained in his human form to save energy, wrapped in the grease-stained tarp. His skin was the color of ash. He leaned on a thick branch he had found, his gait hitched and slow. Every few minutes he had to stop to catch his breath. The silver burns on his back were starting to peel, showing raw pink skin underneath. "How much further?" Cassie asked. She stopped to check her brass compass. The needle pointed steady now, north, toward the peaks. "The outskirts are near," Jax rasped. He wiped sweat from his brow. "I can smell the chemicals, the scent of sulfur and bleach. It never leaves the soil." Killer trotted between them, his ears alert. The Chihuahua was the only one with any energy left. He stopped to sniff a dead log, then let out a sharp, short bark. Cassie froze. She scanned the trees. Movement flashed through the branches 50 yards ahead. It wasn't a scavenger. It was something larger, moving with a fluid, predatory grace. "Jax!" she hissed. Jax straightened his back. He dropped the tarp, standing naked and scarred in the cold mountain air. His eyes turned a dull amber. He sniffed the wind. "They are here, my brothers." 3 figures stepped into the clearing. They were mutants, but they were different from Jax. They were smaller, their fur a mottled brown and black. Their eyes were blood red, a sign of the madness that came from a lack of the serum. They did not speak. They did not offer terms. They crouched, their claws extending from their fingertips. "Jax!" the leader of the pack growled. His voice was a ruined mess of sounds. "The runaway returns. You smell of man. You smell of weakness." Jax stepped forward, his fists clenched. "I seek the serum, Thorn. Stand aside." Thorn let out a cackle that sounded like breaking glass. "There is no serum left for traitors. Only the hunger." These things used to be men. Now they are just teeth and rage. Cassie drew her pistol. She aimed it at Thorn's head. "We are going through. Move, or I start counting down from 6. The brown mutants ignored her. They did not fear the gun. They only saw the meat inside the flight suit. They coiled their muscles, preparing to spring. Chapter 23. Thorn moved like a whip. He leaped across the clearing, his claws aimed at Jax's throat. Jax met him midair. The 2 giants crashed into the dirt, a blur of silver and brown fur. The sound of the impact was a dull thud that shook the ground. The other 2 mutants turned toward Cassie. "No!" she shouted. She fired. The bullet struck the closest mutant in the shoulder. He spun around, a yowl of pain escaping his throat. But he did not go down. He stayed on his feet, his red eyes burning with a new level of hate. Cassie realized her mistake. These things did not feel pain like humans. They were built to soak up damage. "Get that, killer!" she yelled. The wounded mutant lunged. Cassie dived to the left, her boots skidding on the pine needles. Killer tumbled out of her unzipped suit, landing in the dirt with a yip. She felt the wind of the beast's claws as they whistled past her ear. She rolled and came up on one knee, aiming for his head this time. 5 bullets. I have to make them count. Behind her, Jax was losing. He was too weak from the bridge and the silver burns. Thorn was on top of him, his claws digging into Jax's chest. Blood sprayed across the dirt. Jax roared, a sound of pure agony, but he could not shake the smaller, faster beast. The third mutant, a female with tattered fur, circled Cassie. She was waiting for an opening. Cassie backed toward a large pine tree, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was trapped. If she shot the one in front of her, the one behind would have her before she could turn. "Jax! Get up!" she screamed. Jax's hand shot out. He grabbed Thorn's throat and squeezed. The brown mutant gagged, his claws slowing. But the other two were closing in on Cassie. The wounded male lunged again. Cassie pulled the trigger. The bullet hit him square in the forehead. His head snapped back and he collapsed into a heap of fur and bone. 3 bullets left. The female mutant did not hesitate. She saw her mate fall and let out a scream that shattered the quiet of the mountain, flew from her hand, sliding across the pine needles. The mutant was on her, hot saliva dripping from her jagged teeth. She raised a clawed hand to end it. "Kill her!" Cassie choked out. The tiny Chihuahua did not run. He didn't hide. He launched himself at the female mutant's face. He didn't bite a limb. He went for the eye. Chapter 24. Killer's tiny jaws clamped onto the mutant's ear and eyelid. He growled with a ferocity that defied his size. The female mutant shrieked, her head snapping to the side as she tried to shake the tiny creature off. It was the only distraction Cassie needed. She reached for the pistol. Her fingers brushed the cold steel. She grabbed it, rolled, and pressed the barrel against the mutant's ribs. 3 bullets left. She fired twice. The mutant slumped over, her weight pinning Cassie to the dirt. Cassie pushed the carcass off her, gasping for breath. Her chest felt like it had been hit by a sledgehammer. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes searching for Jax. He was pinned. Thorn was a mountain of brown fur, his teeth inches from Jax's throat. Jax's arms were shaking, his strength finally gone. The gash on his bicep was a red ruin. "Thorn, stop!" Cassie yelled. She leveled the pistol at the leader's head. "I have 1 bullet left. It has your name on it." Thorn looked at her. He saw his 2 packmates dead in the dirt. He looked at the tiny dog, who was now standing over Cassie, his tan fur stained with mutant blood. Thorn's red eyes flickered with a moment of doubt. "The girl kills like a wolf," Thorn rumbled. He looked back at Jax. "You are lucky, traitor. She has more teeth than you." Thorn pushed off Jax and stood up. He did not run. He backed into the shadows of the trees, his eyes never leaving the gun. "Go to your lab, Jax. Find your peace. It will not save you from what is coming." He vanished into the brush. Cassie ran to Jax. He was lying in a pool of his own blood. His chest was a mess of shallow claw marks. He tried to sit up, but his arms gave out. He fell back, his breathing wet and shallow. "We have to go," Cassie said. She knelt by him, her hands searching for his pulse. "The lab is right there, just over the ridge." Jax looked at her. His amber eyes were clear for the first time in hours. "The dog," he whispered. "He saved us." Killer trotted over and licked Jax's nose. The giant man let out a weak huff that might have been a laugh. "He's a menace," Cassie said. She wiped a tear from her cheek with a grimy hand. "Now get up. I am not carrying you the rest of the way." She hooked her shoulder under his arm. With a groan of pain, Jax stood. They leaned on each other, a scavenger and a monster, and began the final climb toward the tomb of the old world. Chapter 25. The ridge offered a view of a concrete ghost. The North Lab facility sat in a bowl of gray rock, a tomb for giants. No smoke rose from the vents. No lights flickered in the windows. It was a block of dead history. Cassie felt the cold wind bite at the tears in her Navy flight suit. She adjusted her grip on Jax. The mutant was a lead weight on her shoulder. His breathing sounded like a saw through wet wood. Every step he took left a smear of red on the frost. Her bruised ribs sent a spike of pain through her chest with every breath. She tasted salt and grit. Killer trotted ahead. The dog's tan fur looked dull against the gray stone. He did not bark. He knew the silence held a threat. He kept his nose to the ground, sniffing for the scent of the red-eyed pack. They reached the main doors. They were thick steel, rusted at the edges. Cassie checked her pistol. One bullet was left in the chamber, a pathetic defense against whatever lived inside. She shoved the door. It groaned, a sound that set her teeth on edge. Inside, the air felt trapped. It carried a sharp chemical sting that burned her throat. There was no wind here. The halls were long and lined with green tile. Some tiles had cracked and fallen, showing the gray bone of the building. Dust lay thick on every surface. It was a carpet that muffled their boots. Jack slumped against a wall. His human skin was pale, a shade of blue that matched the shadows. "The records," he wheezed. "Floor 3. Cassie found the stairs. The metal steps echoed with every climb. Her lungs burned. She pushed through the haze of fatigue. She had to know if the rumors were true. On the 3rd floor, they found the archives. It was a room filled with rows of tall metal cabinets. Most were tipped over. Paper spilled across the floor like dead leaves in autumn. Cassie began to search. She ignored the labels about chemical yields and mutant strain. She looked for names. Her hands shook as she flipped through the folders. She found a drawer labeled Subject Relocation, Sector 7. Her heart did a somersault. "Toby, please be in these papers." She pulled a thick manila folder from the heap. The edges were chewed by rats. She flipped it open. Her eyes blurred as she saw the photo clipped to the first page. It was a boy with messy hair and a gap in his teeth. It was Toby. The file felt like a lead brick in her hands. She felt the texture of the old paper. It was dry and brittle. She turned the pages with care. The text was typed in a cold, sharp font. It listed his age, his height, and his asthma. They had tracked everything. They had treated her brother like a piece of equipment. Jax moved beside her. He looked at the photo. His amber eyes softened. He saw the resemblance. He saw the hope that Cassie tried to hide. "He was here," Jax whispered. "He was a number," Cassie said. Her voice was a shard of ice. "They called him Subject 402. They moved him 6 months ago." She read the last entry. It was a stamped line in red ink. "Transfer complete. Destination, Safe Zone, Gate 2. Status, healthy." The relief hit her like a hammer to the chest. She slumped against the metal cabinet. The breath she had been holding for 2 years at last left her lungs. Her brother was alive. He was behind the walls she had seen from the ridge. "We have to get out of here," she said. She tucked the folder into the front of her flight suit. It felt like a shield over her heart. "We find your serum, and then we go." Jax nodded. He tried to stand straight, but his knees buckled. He grabbed a desk to stay upright. His hand left a bloody print on the wood. The gash on his arm was still a wet ruin. He was running out of time. "Next room," Jack said. The cold storage. Chapter 26. The cold storage room was a vault of ice and dead air. Frost coated the walls. It sparkled in the beam of Cassie's flashlight. Row after row of glass vials sat in metal racks. Most were smashed. The floor was a mess of frozen blue liquid and glass shards. The air was so cold it hurt to swallow. Jax moved toward a small safe in the corner. He did not look at the broken vials. He knew what he wanted. He knelt on the floor. His breathing was a wet rattle. The cold air made the blood on his chest turn dark and thick. "The red cap," Jax whispered. "Look for the red cap." Cassie scanned the racks. Her eyes darted from vial to vial. She saw green, blue, and yellow. No red. She felt the panic rise in her throat. She moved a stack of boxes. Her boots crunched on the glass. The walls are coming down, and I, at last, have a map to my heart. She checked a hidden drawer under the safe. It was jammed. She grabbed her jerky knife and wedged the blade into the crack. She twisted. The metal groaned and gave way. Inside sat a single vial. It had a bright red cap. "Found it," she said. She handed the vial to Jax. He took it with trembling fingers. He did not wait. He jammed the needle into his thigh. He let out a long breath. His eyes closed. Then a hum started. It was a low, vibrating sound that came from the floor. It grew into a whine. A red light flared on the ceiling. "Intruder alert," a flat mechanical voice said. "Self-destruct sequence initiated. T-minus 5 minutes." The voice held no emotion. It did not care that they were inside. "Jax, get up!" Cassie grabbed his arm. The mutant groaned. His body was changing again. The serum was working, but it was a violent process. His bones cracked. His fur began to grow back in thick, silver patches. He was becoming the beast. But he was doing it without the pain. The red light made his fur look like it was on fire. He stood up, his height returning. He was a giant of silver and muscle once more. "Go," Jax rumbled. His voice was deeper now. "The exit." They ran for the stairs. The building began to shake. Pieces of the ceiling fell around them. Dust choked the air. Cassie looked at her compass. The needle was a spinning mess. The lab's power core was melting down. "This way!" she shouted. They reached the second floor. A pipe burst over their heads. Steam hissed into the hall. It smelled of chemicals and heat. Cassie felt the skin on her face sting. She shielded Killer with her hand. 4 minutes, the voice said. The lab was a maze of fire and falling stone. Cassie felt the heat through her boots. The floor was hot. They were running toward the heart of the blast. "We have to find another way out," she yelled. Jax did not stop. He ran toward a wall of glass at the end of the hall. He did not look for a door. He lowered his shoulder and smashed through the pane. Glass rained down like diamonds. They landed in a loading dock. Cassie saw a white utility truck in the bay. It was covered in dust, but the tires were full. The keys were in the ignition. "The truck!" she pointed. It was not Big Blue. It was a cold, sterile machine. But it was a way out. 3 minutes. Jax leaped into the back. Cassie dived into the driver's seat. She turned the key. The engine hummed. It was a quiet, electric sound. It lacked the heart of Big Blue, but it had power. Chapter 27. The loading dock doors were closed. They were thick steel shutters. There was no button to open them. The power was cutting out. The red lights flickered and died, leaving them in the dark. The building groaned, a sound of twisting metal and cracking stone. 2 minutes, the voice rumbled through the floor. Gray smoke filled the loading dock, making Cassie's eyes water and her throat burn. She gripped the steering wheel of the white truck. It felt smooth and wrong in her hands. "Jax! The doors!" The mutant did not hesitate. He was a silver blur in the mirror. He jumped from the truck bed and landed in front of the shutters. He did not use his hands. He used his entire body. He slammed into the steel like a battering ram. The metal buckled. A gap appeared at the bottom. But the weight of the building was pressing down. The roof of the dock was sagging. A concrete beam fell, blocking the door. It was a ton of solid rock. "We are trapped," Cassie whispered. "If we do not move now, this grave becomes our permanent home." She looked at the concrete beam. Then she looked at the truck. It was a lab vehicle. It was reinforced for hauling heavy gear. She had no choice. She had to use the machine as a tool. "Jax, get in!" she yelled. Jax looked at the beam. He looked at the truck. He understood. He scrambled into the bed. Cassie put the truck in gear, whined. The truck shot forward. One, whined. The truck shot forward. 1 minute. The truck hit the concrete beam. The impact threw Cassie against the steering wheel. Her bruised ribs felt like they snapped. Pain flared in her side, a hot iron poker in her gut. But the beam moved. It slid a few inches. She backed up again. Her head was spinning. She saw spots in her vision. "Again!" Jax roared. She hit the beam a second time. The steel shutters groaned. The concrete cracked. A path opened up. It was narrow and tight. 30 seconds! The building let out a final, deep groan. The floors above them were pancaking. Dust was so thick she could not see the dashboard. She drove by feel. She pushed the truck through the gap. The mirrors sheared off. The white paint was stripped away by the jagged steel. But they were through. They erupted out of the loading dock just as the first explosion hit. The ground rose up. A wave of heat slammed into the back of the truck. Cassie kept her foot on the gas. She did not look back. Chapter 28. Fire lit up the sky. The North Lab facility vanished in a ball of orange and black. The shockwave lifted the truck off the ground for a second. Cassie fought the wheel as they landed. She did not look back. She kept her eyes on the road. The forest was a wall of flame. The trees they had walked through were now torches. The heat pushed against the truck like a solid brick wall. The white paint began to blister and peel. Jack sat in the back. He watched the fire. He was whole again. The serum had fixed the damage. His fur was thick and silver. The amber was back in his eyes. He looked like a king of the waste. Cassie drove through the smoke. She used the hand-drawn map to find the trail. A line of lights. They were bright, and a line of lights. They were bright and steady. It was the safe zone. "I am coming for you, little brother." The gates were huge. They were made of thick steel and topped with wire. Guards stood on the walls with spotlights. One light caught the truck. "Stop the vehicle!" a voice yelled through a speaker. Cassie hit the brakes. The truck skidded to a stop 100 yards from the gate. She turned off the engine. The silence was complete. Jax hopped down from the truck bed. He walked to the driver's side window. He looked at the gate. "This is your home," he said. "It is where Toby is," Cassie said. She reached into her flight suit and touched the folder. "What about you?" Jax looked at the fire behind them. "The man who made me is dead. The beast is at peace. I will find a new territory, somewhere far from labs and walls." Killer jumped from the seat. He ran to Jax and licked the mutant's hand. "Take the dog," Jax said. He is too small for the woods. No, Cassie said. She looked at Killer. The dog was looking at Jax with a wagging tail. He made his choice on the mountain. He belongs with the pack. Jax looked at the tiny dog. He reached down and picked Killer up. He tucked the Chihuahua into the crook of his arm. He is a parasite, Jax rumbled, but there was no bite in his voice. The gates began to open. Soldiers stepped out with rifles. They looked at the girl in the torn flight suit. They looked at the giant silver beast. Go, Jack said. Cassie stepped out of the truck. She did not look back at the lab. She looked at the gates. She looked at the chance for a life that did not involve scavenging for scraps. Thank you, Jax, she said. The mutant nodded. He turned and walked into the shadows of the valley. He moved with a grace that no human could match. He was a part of the wild now. Cassie walked toward the lights. She felt the weight of the past 2 days falling away. She had lost her truck. She had lost her home. But she had found her heart. As the guards surrounded her, she smiled. For the first time in years, she felt safe. The illusion was gone. The truth was better. The end. Quick favor, don't go anywhere yet. If you thought Cassie was crazy for swinging a mechanic's wrench at a 7-foot mutant Lycan, wait until you meet the heroine in this next story on your screen. You have to hear this disaster unfold. Click the video on your screen right now. It is a completely wild ride.